Yes, I want to leave this page. Okay. I think we are happening or happening ish. Uh, no, I believe we are actually happening. Good to see you all. Any of you happen to be here anyway. I'm Tad. I will be here for a while, for pretty much close to an hour. And so good to see you. Happy Sunday to you. Those of you overseas, I hope your morning is going well. Well, at least those of you in Europe, hope your morning is going well. Those of you in other parts of the world, I hope your day is good, whatever time of the day it might be. And God, what's been going on? Busy day today. Oh my Lord. Not in any bad ways, just super busy. We had a date to go see the Superman movie, the James Gunn, David Cornsweet, etc. Superman movie with our young people, or at least most of our young people. We had to leave one young person at home on dog sitting duty. But anyway, but before that, one of my very oldest friends, and certainly one of my closest friends, is his mom turned 100. So there was a party for her, and even though it was completely in the opposite direction from where we were eventually going to wind up, we had to go and see and give love and stuff like that. So of course we did, and we had maybe like 20 minutes at the party, and then we had to hop on the freeway again and head off to where we were meeting the kids for the movie. But it was very good to see my friend's mom, and I'm just really glad that she's still with us. She's one of the very last of my friend's parents who are still with us, and I have, besides my own parents, the both parents of my elementary school friend, my first real friend, are gone, and this particular friend whose mom we saw today, his dad died, so his mom is the last parent, really, of the parents that I spent a lot of time at their houses when I was younger. With the friend we saw today, it was mostly junior high school and high school age. The other one I was mentioning was back in elementary school. But anyway, I'm not using anybody's name because not all of my friends really want me talking, probably don't want me talking about them online. So I try to be I try to be careful about that. Anyway, but it was very, very good to see the lady in question. And the movie was really good, I thought. I mean, it was very much a James Gunn movie, and in fact, what was one of the interesting things about it was seeing the some of the regular James Gunn folks showed up in smallish roles. A lot of if you're not a comic book person, there will be things that slide past you because there are obviously, as there tend to be with these comic book movies. Because the thing you have to understand, if you're not a comic book fan, is comic books, the major characters. Well, Superman's been around since 1938, and there have been points in which Superman was like most really, really popular characters, where Superman was appearing in multiple comics every month. And as a result, this incredibly complicated soap opera-ish lore of all the things that have happened to the character and all the minor characters and all that stuff. So any good comic book movie, meaning a comic book movie that appeals to the old fans as well as people who don't know so much, will have some of each. It'll have some of the exciting stuff that everybody wants to see, but also some stuff to make the original fans, or at least the older fans, feel like, feel seen, I guess. What is sometimes called fan service, but that's become kind of a negative. When you call something fan service these days, it usually means strictly, it's a pejorative, basically. And there was some what I would call fan service, although I don't use the word in quite that same pejorative way. It was all nicely done. I mean, for instance, they had several characters. This one does not retell the origin, which, like the later Spider-Man movies, is a good move. You don't need to keep telling the origins over and over again. This had Superman. This is not a spoiler. If this is a spoiler to you, then you are completely new to the character, and I'm sorry, I can't help you. But Clark Kent, Superman's alternate identity, his secret identity, although in some ways he's really Clark Kent, works at the Daily Planet as a newspaper reporter. And while they, of course, did that and had Lois Lane and all that, it's later on where he and Lois actually have a relationship. But more importantly, for what I'm talking about, is they had a lot of the Daily Planet characters, including they brought Jimmy Olsen back, but they also had Cat Fox, and I forget what the sports reporter guy is, but these characters that had been, not as taken care of. And some of them go back to the comics, and especially the 70s John Byrne reboot of Superman, and some of them go back to the Brandon Routh, or Brandon Roth, or Ruth, or however it's pronounced, Superman Returns, or whatever that was called, which was very definitely, I think, a purposeful thing. I think in a way it was like, let's just pretend that the Zack Snyder comics didn't exist, which is, it's sad in some ways because Henry Cavill was a very good Superman. I mean, he played the part very well. He fit the part. He looked the part. So does the new guy, David Corenswet, by the way. I'd only seen some of the trailers, but seeing him actually doing the thing, I thought he did very well. And Rachel Brosnahan, I think is her name. Anyway, the one who played Lois Lane, she was really good. In some ways, the best character was, I thought, was Nicholas Hoult, who definitely actually made me almost feel sorry for Lex Luthor. But I thought he definitely he knocked it out of the park as compared to, say, Jesse Eisenberg, who I really like in a lot of things, but I didn't think that the way that his Luthor was written and that he was given it to play worked quite as well in the Zack Snyder Superman movies. But anyway, okay, so that's enough minutia and trivia. But if you have any taste at all for superhero movies, you will probably enjoy. I would say you would probably enjoy the Superman movie. And again, it's very James Gunn, so there are bits that are tongue-in-cheek, there are bits that are funny, the action sequences are very good. It's not a perfect movie, but it's certainly the best DC movie I've seen in a while, with the possible exception of the first Wonder Woman movie. At least off the top of my head, that's what I can think of, where I went, oh yeah, they did a good job with that. And I thought they did a good job with this too, which is nice. I mean, I actually worked for DC for a while. So seeing how badly the DC movie universe had kind of fallen on hard times has always made me sad, even though I grew up as more of a Marvel fan. Anyway, enough comic book trivia. And what else has been going on? It was a lot of driving today, obviously. I am working. I'm working on the Splintered Sun and beginning to feel like, yeah, okay, I've figured it out. I know what's going on with the bits that I had to rewrite, and it's been an interesting book. I'll talk more about it at some later stage because it has been unlike a lot of novels in the sense that I kind of felt like, even though it's set in Ostenard, I sort of felt like it felt like a novel that I was beginning from scratch in a lot of ways. And so I've had a lot of ups and downs with it in terms of how I wanted to tell the story and stuff like that. So, but I'm not going to go into great detail on that. I'll wait until I can read an excerpt or something and talk a little bit about it. What else? Dogs. I mentioned that we had to have a dog sitter. Although we're having a few little breakthroughs. We've now been able to have them both in the same room several times. We've had no squabbling. Johnny, of course, is still discretion is the better part of valor. Is Johnny's feeling about things, and he doesn't hang around much. He if he comes in, he comes in for some specific purpose, like to see if Lemon is gone in her crate, or or he knows she's out of the house with Deb on a walk or something, and he wants to come in and check things out and sniff the places she sleeps and steal any chews she might have left around. But they actually have been face to face several times in the last few weeks because we've been kind of being more God, I can't even think of my words tonight. I'm tired. But we have been a bit more permissive. There's the word I wanted. We've been a bit more permissive about letting them be in the same space and all of that, and without, like having them both on leashes or one on a leash or whatever, which normally has to be Lemon because she is the one who will run at Johnny. Not in an aggressive, well, it is aggressive, but not in a sense of wanting to do him any harm, but just like, another dog. Okay, I know him now. He's the other dog who lives here. I want to get right up on him and sniff that butt, which is, and she's charming, but she is, just a high velocity meat nugget, as somebody referred to that to pit bulls once, and she's definitely that. Or was it muscle nugget? I don't know. Anyway, she is whatever you want to call her. So anyway, so dog's doing pretty well. We actually have them out together in the backyard, and although we've so far kept Lemon on a leash, and we've had them in the house together with neither one of them on a leash, and things are definitely moving forward. I'm hoping by the time we go to Denmark for a week in September that they will actually be able to hang out together. So we will see. We will keep our fingers crossed and see how that works. Anyway, and I can't offhand think of anything else. I mentioned last week that I finished the story I was working on, and that has gone off to the anthology, Unbroken. And can't think of anything else off the top of my head, although, as is often the case with me, something will probably suddenly come back to me and I'll just blurt it out. So let me just check in and see who else has showed up. And I see my friend Ivan. Hello, Ivan. Good to see you, buddy. Evan Lord, nice to have you with us. Rosalba, a pleasure as always. Ilva, darling, hello. I was just thinking about you today and thinking that one of these days soon, we should check in and have a conversation. Kristen, good to see you too. Nikki Chetwin, pleasure to have you with me as always. Suzanne, of course. That's Suzanne Owen. Chris Fab, hello Chris, good to see you, buddy. Andre, and you too, Andre. And there is my buddy Olaf, always a pleasure. And Nicole, and Mr. Mark Craigbaum, he of the other Tiny Brain. Mark and I have had an argument for years, going back to the 1980s. Jesus, God, that's a long time. Anyway, which one of us has the tinier brain? Yeah, real locker room stuff. And one or both of us used to use the phrase TBS, tiny brain syndrome, to explain when we lost our way on something that we were talking about, or just made a joke that didn't work or whatever. And as I recall, we never did quite establish who was the actual founder of the tiny brain syndrome. But the fact is that we both have it. And so I don't want to take that away from Mark. He definitely has tiny brain too, just like me. Anyway, so good to see you, Mark. Nice to have you with us. Mark Redmond, checking in from Yorkshire, I assume. Penny Davies, good to see you. And Christy Sanders, a pleasure. And let me see this. Evan says, it's a good thing I watched the Superman movie before this. I didn't give anything away. I didn't give anything major away. I mean, if you saw any of the promos, you know that it's got Lex Luthor in it. You know that it's got Lois Lane in it. So I don't think I gave anything away, did I? Anyway, if I did, then you probably shouldn't mention it in the comments anyway, because it might give it away for anybody else. And there's my friend Jeremy. God, everybody's checking in tonight. Lovely to have you. We're missing Petra and who else said they were not going to be here tonight? Anyway, sorry, my brain is just fuzz. So I hope you're all doing well. I am going to read tonight. I just have no brain whatsoever. Too much driving, too much sun in the eyes. And it can't be helped. So I will check back in with you soonly. And let me see. Yes, okay. Anyway, so what was I saying? Oh, so yeah, two of our regulars, Petra and Christina, are not going to be with us tonight. So, but I hope they're having a good time. I hear they're in Ireland, which is, of course, one of my favorite places. And like many Americans, I can trace a portion of my lineage back to Ireland. As I mentioned, Pat, in the past, my family heritage, at least on the side I know about, which is my mom's side, in part because her sister did a lot of genealogy, is almost all traces back to small, pale-skinned people in northern Europe, mostly, before we got to America, Scandinavia, northern Germany, and of course the whole Celtic fringe. So that's my people. That's my people. Anybody who doesn't like the sun, those are my people. Anyway, we're troglodytes. I come from a long line of troglodytes. We are cave dwellers. We are people who lived in sod huts or in huts made of stacked peat or whatever, wattle and daub, and we had to stay out of the sun because we're pale and we get we get sunsick easily. So I hope they're having a great time in Ireland. I've only really been there once. I had a lovely trip with, of all people, Anne McCaffrey, fine writer, wonderful person. Anne was just so much fun. And we had a trip with several other writers, and we traveled around Ireland and, Dublin, Cork, various other places. It's been so long ago now, I only only partially remember it, but I do remember that it was a very good time. And I'm not saying that as a euphemism for drinking or anything, although I probably had a couple of drinks, but I'm not much of a drinker. It was just a good time. Ireland is a great country. The people there are lovely, and they were, nice to us. But, my wife once said something to me. I am going to read, folks, don't worry. But my wife once said to me, you've got it so good because for your job, when you meet people, like you're the total opposite of a police officer. Because most police officers, when they're interacting with people in the public, it's like the worst day of that person in the public's life. They're like drunk, or they've crashed their car, or they've been, they're being dragged downtown because they've had a dispute with their spouse, or whatever the case may be. So police are always seeing the worst side of people, and bless them for what they have to put up with. This is not exempting bad police officers. I know there are a few, but there are also a lot of police officers who just have a tough-ass job. But as my wife pointed out, she said, when you go out as a professional person, what you're mostly seeing are people coming up to you and going, oh, I like your work, and she's right. I mean, how lucky can you get that that's the interaction you have with people when you go out in public on behalf of your profession, that people are actually saying, oh, I came specially to tell you that I like what you do. So I'm obviously extremely grateful for that. And I honestly don't, I, in my early days as a writer, yes, of course, there were signings that almost nobody showed up for, or the ones where I was signing at some bookstore in a mall and they like stuck me at a table out in front and people thought I was giving away free samples, and they would just walk up and take a book off the thing and start walking away with it. And they put me in the position of having to defend the store's books, even though they were technically my books that I'd written. But I'm like, sorry, excuse me, that's not free. It is not a piece of summer sausage on a toothpick. That is actually a book that I will sign if you want it signed. And of course, you sit out there in front of whatever it is, PJ Illiterate or whatever the name of the chain store was at the time. They're mostly all gone now, but B. Dalton, or if in England, Waterstones, but the places where you'd sit outside in front in a mall, you'd get these like really sweet little old ladies who'd go like, oh, honey, I'll buy one of your books. Is it a kid's book? I could give it to my grandkid. And you're like, well, yeah, except for the parts where people get stuff cut off of them with swords or where they get tortured. And that's, no, you don't want to buy. Oh, but honey, I want to buy one from you. I'm sure you worked really hard on it. And you're like, oh, God. But anyway, since that point, which was early on in my career, back when there was still a B. Dalton's and places like that, I actually, I don't think I've ever had a bad book signing, book tour experience. Because even if you just get a few people, they're the people who came. You don't want to be upset with them. You don't want to cheat them of the experience, whatever experience they came out for, to meet you or whatever, ask questions. It just means you get to spend a little more time with people than you ordinarily would. So I've never had a bad experience, and I have to say almost all of them are great just because of the fact of what they are. I mean, what a lucky thing to do, to go out in public and have people go, hey, I'm here because I like what you do. I don't know. I'm just babbling again. Okay, I'm going to start reading. I have run very late with my babble, and I didn't mean to, but it does happen to me sometimes, and so I'll make another volume. When in doubt, declare your trilogy to be a tetralogy and make another volume. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to go back to what's going on. So Bobby is in pandemonium. He got his hand bitten off, his demon hand in his demon body, bitten off, and he managed to make it all the way to up the elevator while losing blood. Stumbled out into the street, got hit by a vehicle, and has been taken home by a woman named Vera, who, along with her maid Belle, have taken him in and done their best to patch up his wounds. And turns out Vera knows a lot of people in high hell society, and she has introduced them to several of them, and they have been invited to the opera. And all Bobby knows is that the President Came, C-A-Y-M, President Came, one of the presidents of hell, has told them, oh, yes, we're doing it again. It's the opera, and himself is going to be starring in it. And everybody thinks this is really exciting, and we don't know why. Anyway, the night of the opera came. After I got dressed in my Prince Albert finery, I waited a long time for Vera, who, unsurprisingly, wanted her appearance to be perfect. She settled at last on a sumptuous red velvet dress with a low neckline that showed off her full, almost exuberant figure. After I had complimented her as extravagantly as I knew how, I still wasn't quite comfortable with what felt to me like intentionally old-fashioned ways of talking and acting. Henri, the chauffeur, brought the car, and we were off to the theater. Pandemonium no longer seemed like it had when I first arrived, bleeding and near death. It was still dark and grotesque, but now it seemed more like one of those foreign cities you encounter in spy stories like Cold War Berlin or Bogart's Casablanca. Full of terrible danger, yes, but also full of excitement and possibility. Did that mean I could overlook the monsters in the streets just because I traveled in safety? Overlook the terrible suffering, worse than you could find in the most desperate third world capital? Yes, to an extent. I was already beginning to feel like I'd do anything to avoid the horror of being cast out to wander hell again without allies or protection. Forget my principles if I had to. Forget my angelic training. Forget almost everything. It sneaks up on you that way. But I still couldn't forget Kaz, no matter what else happened. I'm not exaggerating when I say that she was the only thing that kept me from tumbling into the abyss. I'd guess that the Dionysus Theater would be like La Scala or something. Was I pronouncing it Dionysus or Dionysus? I'll say Dionysus. I'd guess that the Dionysus Theater would be like La Scala or something, one of those fancy opera places, a big classical building with columns, meant to proclaim, hey, we got culture. But I was reckoning without Hell's sense of humor. The theater was a few blocks off Dispater Square, tucked in at the end of a wide street full of strange, misshapen buildings, not the high towers of the wealthy, but the hive-like habitations that the rest of Pandemonium's residents fought to get into, with their bottom floors given over to small shops and other businesses. But the joke, I realized, when I saw the electrical sign with its vertical letters glowing through the permanent dusk, was that the Dionysus was a dark mirror copy of the Apollo Theater in Harlem, a place I'd actually been once, the closest your friend Bobby Dollar had ever come to a religious pilgrimage. Cars and carriages and even more bizarre forms of transportation crowded the street as the high and mighty arrived, along with interested spectators and crowds of beggars who were one tossed bone away from turning into a snarling wolf pack. The Dionysus had a large troop of brawny house soldiers armed with what looked like most of the history of warfare, from clubs to steam-driven Gatling guns. And since most of the really well-to-do traveled with their own household guards as well, even the most dangerous and desperate of the onlookers kept a respectful distance. But it was a reminder that, like any place that specialized in the snatch and grab style of wealth acquisition, the only real security was what you could buy. As we waited to go in, I asked Vera again who the himself was who was performing. It wasn't advertised out front, only the name of the opera, The Coronation of Poppaea. I'd never heard of it. Then again, I've never been big on classical music or opera, at least compared to what jazz and blues do for me. As much as I was getting used to hell, I still had a gut-clenching moment when I saw that the interior was built in the style of one of those old Parisian catacombs, made literally out of bones and skulls, although here they had been crafted into far more than simple walls and doorways. The arched ceiling was paneled with scenes of nature that incorporated the bones of all manner of animals, frisking sheep and placid cows, and of course the human skeletons that watched over them. It might have been the flickering torchlight that made these skeletons seem to move slightly, as though alive but under a spell. Yeah, it might just have been torchlight, but I don't think so. The immense candelabra, the balconies, the very pillars that supported the building were also made from human and semi-human skulls and bones, many brightly painted in red or gold or white, giving the theater the look and feel of a truly disturbing circus tent. Grand President Came waved to us from his private box above, a little flourish of his long fingers that made him look more than ever like some immense bird shaking out its feathers. Vera was thrilled to be singled out in public by the great fellow himself. I tried to smile. The curtain rose and the opera began. I couldn't make a lot of sense of it, but it seemed to be about ancient Rome. The first bit was singing gods and goddesses, but the music was something even older than the kind of opera I was used to hearing on television and radio. Something from the Renaissance or even earlier, I guessed. For a moment, I found myself wondering if Kaz would have regarded it as too modern, since she had told me the Renaissance was after her time. The thought made me sad. It was easier to send it away like an extra being directed off stage and out of sight behind one of the immense brocade curtains. Not wanting to think about Kaz, and not even certain why, I pulled myself back to the opera and the mystery of the himself that Kame had referred to. None of the performers seemed unusual, all clearly talented, none of them recognizable. As I did my best to listen to the lyrics, I came to realize that the opera was about the Roman Emperor Nero, the very same Nero whose crumbling bridge I had crossed to get into hell. The irony of it amused me. I wondered how many other people in this charnel house of an opera palace even knew that the Neronian bridge existed. Then the singer portraying the emperor made his entrance, and for the first time I sensed something odd going on. It wasn't anything about the performer, at least, not to look at. He wasn't particularly handsome, a bit thick-faced, with a sagging, wrinkled neck, and his legs were a bit skinny for the toga he was wearing, but I sure didn't recognize him. Others did, however, and he was greeted with applause, and, to my surprise, a few catcalls and some laughter. Also, unlike the other singers, he did not look particularly comfortable on stage, which made him an odd choice to play the monarch. I supposed he had a fabulous voice to make up for it, because everyone else in the cast seemed world-class. I was mildly startled when he got ready to sing, because his throat swelled like the bulging neck sack of a bullfrog, though even that didn't seem unusual. A lot of the other cast members and most of the audience bore some physical sign of what they were. But when he finally began his aria, the Emperor's voice was a distinct disappointment, more than a bit rough and not very strong. Some in the audience actually laughed, which made him falter, and the jeers grew louder as he doggedly pursued the song, his throat sac distending and shrinking like the bellows on an accordion, his face growing more fearful by the moment as the crowd shouted at him. He finished, and someone else began singing, but the spell of attention had been broken, and many in the audience were talking or laughing out loud. I couldn't figure it out at all, but as I wondered why such a poor singer should be trotted out in front of the nobility of hell that way, I was distracted by a late entrance in the upper boxes. A hush fell over the crowd, and some poor soprano's aria was suddenly less important than everybody turning around to see who was being seated in President Kame's box. The late arrival didn't look the same as the last time I'd seen him, but I still knew him instantly. He was dressed in a beautifully cut white dress uniform, the kind of thing you'd expect to see at a royal funeral in some old newsreel, except that the white fabric was so artfully splattered with arterial splashes of scarlet that I had no doubt it had been designed that way. The only question was whether it was real blood or just dye. I thought I could guess. Grand Duke Eligor looked less human than he did on Earth, but for the moment he also looked less demonic than the monstrous form that had overtaken him as he dangled me by the neck a couple of feet above his office carpet back in San Judas. His blonde hair was shaved very close to his head, and his facial features were bonier and older than on his Kenneth Wald persona. Less like a California billionaire and more like the fascist dictator of some imaginary northern European country, a creature of hard angles and fierce, unyielding principles. But it was definitely him, Eligor the Horseman, my least favorite demon. My hackles went up. I was relieved I was in shadows, that my treacherous, underwhelming disguise wasn't visible to him, even from this distance. Only as I, and most of the other patrons, sat staring at Eligor settling into his seat, did I have a moment of wondering where Kaz was. That only lasted a moment, because once the Grand Duke had seated himself, one of the guards at the back of his box opened the door, letting in a gleam of pure white gold. That was Kaz, of course. Chapter 24, Fickle. My heart felt as though it had stopped, literally stopped, and would not start again. Kaz's face was rigid, blank as a mask. She wore a long red dress whose spatters and splashes of white made her a mirror of her master, an even clearer mark of Eligor's ownership than the guard who seated her next to the Grand Duke and then stood behind her chair like a jailer. Oh, God, my heart. Everything came back in a moment. Our desperate nights together, the months of longing since, and it was all I could do not to climb out of my seat and run toward her. The crowd, many of them still whispering, had turned back to the action as the Emperor stepped up to sing again, but I couldn't look away. I can only imagine what my face must have looked like. Finally, Vera's elbow, applied briskly and with obvious anger to my ribs, brought my attention back to the stage, but I could think of nothing else for a long time. I snuck a few glances at Kaz, but she was never looking at me or anyone else in the audience, not even looking at the performers. Instead, she sat like a frightened schoolgirl, eyes downcast. Eligor ignored her, watching the action below through a pair of opera glasses. The snickering and jeering resumed as the singer with the bulging throat laboriously climbed the mountain of his aria, looking more than ever like someone who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. The catcalls got louder. Then, as he strained for and badly missed a high note, something came hurtling out of the lower galleries and past his head. He did his best to dodge it and suffered only an unpleasant stain on his tunic as the clot of mud or excrement bounced off him. For a moment, as I watched what looked like a small riot beginning in the seats below us, I almost forgot Kaz, so tantalizingly close. I assumed that whoever had tried to assault the performer was being caught and hustled out, but it quickly became clear that the ruckus was more general. Something like anarchy broke out on the floor of the Dionysus Theater, and before a few more bars of the aria had wavered by, a heavier projectile hit the Emperor right in the gut, knocking him to his knees. Something else struck his head. Blood coursed down the side of his face and onto his white imperial tunic. For a moment he cowered as more missiles hit him, arms wrapped around his head for protection. The jeering grew louder, and a whole cloud of rocks and rotten food and less pleasant things arced out of the crowd, seeking out the cringing singer as though he were the condemned at a public stoning. The music played on, but the singer was on his hands and knees now, bloody and weeping. The crowd shrieked at him, an animal sound that seemed to grow louder by the second. Then they quickly, if not uniformly, fell silent, and all eyes turned again to the Grand President's box. Kame was standing at the rail, and the contortion of his crow-like face showed he was furious. But instead of berating the unruly crowd, he leaned out and pointed a long claw-like finger at the performer. "Get up, you tub of mischief! Who do you think you are? You have been brought here to sing, and sing you will." The actor looked up, his face bloody, his throat sac deflated and hanging over his chest like a dirty bib. "Please, Grand President, please. I cannot." A rock hit him in the shoulder and he almost fell. "It hurts. It hurts me so." "Shut your mouth, you pathetic ingrate. You wanted to sing, and sing you shall. And what better role for you than your own wretched life?" For an instant, even Kaz and my hated enemy Eligor fell out of my thoughts as I finally realized what was going on. This was Nero himself, the emperor who had tried to cheat hell, singing the story of his own wretched life for the amusement of hell's high rollers. Like I've said before, nobody can carry a grudge like a demon. Order was restored, but it only got worse for Nero from there. Time and again he would begin to sing and be pelted by garbage and shit or knocked down by stones, some of them as big as a baby's head. I distinctly heard one of them break his arm, but Came wouldn't let him stop, although it was harder and harder to distinguish his singing from shrieks of pain and terror. I kept sneaking looks at Kaz. Her face showed no emotion whatsoever, but Eligor was clearly enjoying the spectacle, laughing and whispering with Came. At last, nearing what seemed to be the middle of the opera, a thunderous barrage of larger missiles, great jagged things that might have been broken paving stones, crushed Nero to the stage, and though he struggled to get up, it was hopeless. At this point, things went completely mad. Members of the audience leaped up on stage and began to kick him and beat him with the largest pieces of stone. Nero offered no resistance at all. It all had the feeling of a ritual enacted many times. Even with the musicians still playing gamely along, it sounded like someone jumping up and down on a barrel of eggs. As Nero was reduced to a bloody, wet tatter, I looked up to see Eligor saying goodbye to Came. Kaz was already gone. "That was his best performance yet," a man said in a loud, braying voice behind me. "Folded him up before they even got to the part about Seneca." In other words, this happened all the time. 2,000 years Nero had been in hell, and they still humiliated him in public on a regular basis, not to mention tormenting and destroying his body over and over again. What would they do to me if they found out? After all, Emperor Nero had been on their side. On the way home, Vera was quieter than usual, and although she stroked my hair, as she liked to do while we sped through the red flickering streets of Pandemonium, she did it roughly, distracted perhaps by what she had seen, so that again and again she pricked me with her fingernails. As for me, I should have been as excited and terrified by seeing Kaz as I had been during those first moments after she entered the theater, but instead I was suddenly exhausted. Too much for one day. I was finding it hard to keep my eyes open as the roar of the steam boiler and the red strobe of the city lights dragged me down into a half-sleep. For a moment I imagined myself on that stage, broken and bleeding, laughed at by hell's leading citizens, but even that horrific image couldn't keep me from being pulled down, down, down. Before I read this next part, I will just tell you it's pretty graphic and pretty unpleasant. So I will just warn any of you who might be easily shocked or upset and haven't read this book or don't remember this part of it. I'll just warn you that, okay? Thank you. "Tighter," I heard Vera saying to someone, as if down a pipe or from a long distance. I was groggy, I realized, but understanding didn't improve anything. Groggy and weak. Why was she talking? Why wouldn't she let me sleep? "No, tighter," she said. "I can't, my lady," said a deep female voice, Belle. "It doesn't fit right, even with his hand growing back. The strap won't stay." "Then tie it. Use a piece of cord." Belle was apparently helping her mistress put on her nightclothes, but why were they doing it in my room? Or was I in Vera's room? And why were they talking about my hand? Wherever it was, I couldn't be lying in a very comfortable position because my joints were aching. I tried to open my eyes, but that wasn't as easy as it sounds. Even my lids felt weighed down like someone had set Charon's heavy coins on them. But I had already made that journey, hadn't I? I had already crossed the river of death because I was in hell. Could you cross twice? I was confused, my thoughts thick like syrup. At last I got my eyes open, something that took actual hard effort. I was in my own room, all right, and Vera and Belle were indeed struggling with cords and straps, but it had nothing to do with Lady Zink's nightwear, because Vera was still dressed for the opera. The cord in question was being tied around my wounded arm, which apparently had kept coming out of its restraining strap. My other arm with a whole hand hadn't been a problem for them. It was bound securely to the headboard of the bed. As Belle pulled on the cord knotted around my arm just below the elbow, I realized for the first time what was going on, although for a moment I didn't quite grasp the why of it. Had I fallen out of bed? Injured myself? Why was I being restrained? But then the first cold gust of reality blew through me, and some of the grogginess receded. "You may go now, Belle," said Vera when both of my arms were pulled out straight on either side. My ankles had been bound as well, and I was helpless as any sacrificial victim. "I have things to say to Lord Snakestaff that require privacy." "As you say, mistress." But Belle clearly didn't want to go, and she paused in the doorway, filling it with her large frame to look at her handiwork. Me, trussed like a turkey about to go in the oven. Vera was pacing back and forth beside the bed, the color in her cheeks darker and deeper than I had ever seen. "In gratitude." Her voice had changed. All the charm and life had gone out of it, and although it's hard to believe, I promise you that her cold tones frightened me in a way that even the straps hadn't. "In gratitude and fickleness. Again. All of you. I thought you were different, Snakestaff. Oh, I had such hopes for you." "I don't know what you're talking about." It was hard to make words properly. I felt drugged or drunk. "All men are liars." The hatred was so strong in her voice I couldn't believe it was the same woman. "Whores! You call us whores, but you are the ones without shame. I saw her. I saw you staring at that filthy, white-haired slut of Eligor's. Why do you like her? Why do you like her?" She came to my side and grabbed my hair so hard, some of it came out, shaking my head until I thought she'd snap my neck. She was stronger than I'd ever guessed. "I gave you everything. I gave you my love. I would have given you more than that. I would have made you one of my immortals. But now you'll rot in the dung heaps of Gehenna. Pig!" Even as Vera was shouting at me, tears of anger running down her red cheeks, she clambered onto the wide bed beside me. Helpless, I could only turn my face away, certain that she was going to hit or scratch me, but instead her fingers plucked frenziedly at the strings of her bodice as if it were too tight and she couldn't breathe. She put a knee squarely on my belly and then pulled down the front of her opera dress, spilling her breasts. She was beautiful and perversely never more so than at that moment, her chest heaving, dark hair swinging as she straddled me. I braced myself again to be hit, but instead she bent and fumbled with my trousers. I yanked at my restraints, but couldn't pull either my arms or legs free, and although I did my best to buck her off me, it was like wrestling with some great wild cat. She flattened herself between my legs as she pulled down my clothes, and she sat up straight, my legs locked between hers. She reached down and grabbed me and squeezed until I shouted in pain. "Miserable thing! Man!" The eyes staring into mine now were terrifying. I'd known. I'd kept reminding myself that Vera was in hell for a reason, but meeting Kaz had changed me. Why had I been so willing to believe Vera was only another lost soul, that the kindness she had shown me was real? It was like I hadn't been myself. But what I'd thought of her didn't matter now. What mattered was what she truly was, a raging, mad thing, and I was her prisoner. Even as Vera cursed me, she rubbed herself all over me, tore open my shirt, and dragged her heavy breasts across my skin, across my face, for a moment even pushing one swollen nipple into my mouth like a grieving, hysterical mother trying to suckle a dead child. It was all I could do not to bite down, but she hadn't hurt me badly yet, and for the moment I was in her power, the good arm and the bad one both immobilized. My only hope was to let her work out her anger and hope that afterward she would listen to me. But what could I tell her? I didn't love her, of course, and even if I hadn't discovered this truth about her, I still wouldn't have been able to give her what she wanted. Whatever was in me that could love belonged to Kaz, and seeing her at the theater had rung me like a bell, so that even as I struggled to keep Vera's nails from my eyes, I was still vibrating with that powerful, astounding need for the Countess of Cold Hands. Weeping now, Vera climbed down and grabbed me again. I tensed, terrified that I would find out what it was to lose something even more important than my hand, but she seemed intent on pursuing her parody of passionate affection. She began to stroke, lick, and squeeze me, muttering both endearments and the ugliest kind of threats. It wasn't what you'd call a romantic situation unless you come from the outermost rooms of bondage and degradation, and I've seen too much ugliness in my years on earth to enjoy that. Not to mention my well-known aversion to pain. But Vera was determined. She tugged and squeezed. She kissed me all over. She even put a finger up inside me, nudging until I hardened against my will. Then Vera slid up my body and sat on my chest, naked from the waist up, her hair now completely down and wild on her shoulders, her pale breasts flushed unevenly, swinging above me like church bells. "I would have waited," she panted, still holding me by the root, still squeezing me with her hand to keep the blood in me. Her eyes were fixed on mine. They had changed again, her stare wide-eyed and full of something that looked like desperate affection. "I could have waited until the time was right, darling. It has been a long time, but I have gone a long time before. I wanted it to be perfect." She was squeezing me so hard I could barely speak. "It doesn't have to be." Then her eyes went empty again, as if a switch had been thrown. "You could have been one of my immortal snakestaff. You would have been treasured forever. Instead, you're just another miserable, fickle, lying man. But you'll never go to your white-haired whore. You belong to me. I found you, and you're mine." Her knees against my armpits, Vera began to fumble at her long skirts, pulling them upward with a loud rustling of crinoline, exposing the layers of snowy white petticoats. I could feel a heat against my belly from between her legs, but no matter how I squirmed and fought, I couldn't roll her off me. She was lost in some kind of frenzy of anger and misery, something primitive and not very human. She rose into a half crouch and pulled the rest of her petticoats out of the way. Between her legs, a horror. Purple and dark blue and angry red, it was a bulging, quivering thing like a jellyfish, its ropey strands of translucent flesh dangling on my belly and thighs. A prickling where they touched me became a stinging, then a scalding fire. I screamed. Vera squatted above me and reached down to put her hands flat on my chest, and just before her fingers touched me, I finally saw the translucent, flexible spines like the bristles on a toothbrush growing out from beneath Lady Zink's fingernails and into my flesh. She had been poisoning me. All that time, petting me, stroking my hair, she had been pumping her toxins into me. Some stay-happy fluid to keep me stupid and cheerful. But those toxins had been mild. What she gave me now definitely wasn't. The acid burn in my groin suddenly went nova, filling me up like flaming brandy in all my veins. I could feel my flesh swelling everywhere. Blood pounded in my brain, and I could hardly see, but her eyes held me. Vera's mad eyes. The thing between her legs made a wet noise, a ghastly squelch like nothing I'd ever heard, and then it opened. Beyond the ragged mouth-like frill, the edges were lined with tiny needle teeth, hundreds of them gaping from the slippery, shining purple and pink. I'm sure I tried to scream again because she pulled one of her hands away from my chest. The finger tendrils came loose with a string of sucking pops like ivy being yanked from a wall, then used it to cover my mouth as she lowered herself onto me. My heart wanted to jump out of my chest, but my groin pushed up toward her. Right. My heart wanted to jump out of my chest, but my groin pushed up toward her, offering itself, riding the tide of my own infected, blazing blood. Then she eased herself down, and I felt those tiny, impossible teeth. And I screamed again from behind her hand, screamed and screamed and screamed without stopping. Her face sagged down toward me, mouth open in a kind of ecstasy. Then some kind of membrane slid down from her eyelids, turning her eyes milky white. She rode me without stopping, the obscenity between her legs chewing at me, until I burst and filled her. Lady Zink collapsed on top of me, and my mind finally escaped into blessed darkness. And that's the end of that chapter, and that's also halfway through the book. And I warned you, and I actually cut a few bits out just to make it slightly less disgusting and graphic. But anyway, so that is where we are going to stop for tonight. I will mention to you in passing something I mentioned very briefly last week, but there are several real people in hell in this book. So if any of you are interested, that's a little trivia contest stroke scavenger hunt that actually stroke is the Britishism / scavenger hunt / whatever the first thing was that I said. Anyway, trivia contest / scavenger hunt. To find who any one of the people who are actually real people, and let me know the names of them if you find them, because I did base quite a few people in hell on. And I'm not talking about the big demons. The big demons all come out of various things like the Seal of Solomon and other kinds of bits of esoterica. But quite a few of the people in hell are actually real people, especially the really unpleasant ones. So I just thought I'd mention that. Just a little fun, I look up some mass murderers and other thoroughly horrifying people. Anyway, and so that was probably the most disgusting part of the whole book, although there's certainly parts ahead that are equally awful, or close to equally awful. And with that, I am going to start wrapping up for the night. So thank you. I hope I didn't put any of you off your breakfast. I did try to warn you. And if I didn't put you off your breakfast, what the hell is wrong with you? Anyway, so with that, I want to say thank you very much, as always, for spending time with me and indulging me in all the strange things that I've been doing. Great great to see you all and to have some time with you. And I hope you will also take good care of yourselves, because that's the first and most important step, and the people around you that you care about. And maybe keep an eye out for some people that you don't know so well, but who might need a kind word, or, a couple of bucks, or just a smile. Just a smile. Just let them know that they're out there, and they're in the world too. And because we need each other, guys. That's just the way it works. We need each other. We are humans. We are social animals. We have been for before we were humans, and we need to help each other. That's an important thing to remember. Anyway, other important thing to remember is, as far as I know, actually I'm not 100% certain that I will be reading next weekend, because it's my high school reunion, and I'm not sure which day it's on, but it may happen and prevent me from doing a reading. So please check my Facebook page. I will announce what's going on no later than, well, if I know specifically I'm not going to make it, I'll probably announce it earlier in the week than that. So with that, again, sorry for spoiling your breakfasts, those of you in Europe. Have an excellent week. If I can be here, I will be here. If not, I will let you know and tell you when I'll be back, which would just be, I'm pretty sure it would just be the next weekend. And until then, y'all take good care of yourselves, and I will see you very soon. Peace and ciao, ragazzi mio. Yeah, ciao.